María Amparo Ruiz de Burton.
In 1833, de Burton left Laredo, her hometown in Baja California peninsula of Mexico. In the 1840s, Ruiz was awarded various Baja properties through her grandfather's military conquests. In the 1840s, Ruiz inherited Rancho Ensenada de Todos Santos. In 1845, the American Army occupies Baja. In 1848, at 15, Ruiz witnessed La Paz surrender to America. She also met U.S. Captain Henry Stanton Burton. Burton additionally arranged for Ruiz and her family to move to Monterrey. Ruiz utilized the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo to move to Alta, California, and become a citizen. In 1849, Ruiz and Burton married despite the Catholic and Protestant clash. The minister was additionally forced to defend his decision to marry them. In 1852, Burton was promoted to a higher position in San Diego. Ruiz and Burton moved to that location. In 1854, Burton and Ruiz obtained Rancho Jumul, which is over 500,000 acres of land. Their children, Nellie and Henry, are additionally born. In 1859, Burton is ordered east. Ruiz and her family stay behind for a bit. Ruiz's family and Burton eventually moved to Fort Monroe, Virginia, and Burton receives another significant promotion in the Union Army. In 1861, the family attends Lincoln's inauguration. In 1869, after another significant promotion, Burton dies of a stroke, is buried at West Point, and Ruiz is now a 37-year-old widow with 2 children. In the 1870s, Ruiz encounters legal difficulties in keeping her land. She establishes warehouses in Ensenada, attempting to keep her accrued acres of land. Ruiz also publishes her first 2 novels critiquing Anglo society and exploring themes of discrimination and Latino culture in the U.S. In 1872, Who Would Have Thought It is published. The work is spiteful against New England culture and published anonymously. The work also even portrays Abraham Lincoln satirically. In 1876, Ruiz publishes a play titled Don Quixote de la Mancha, a comedy in 5 acts taken from Cervantes' novel of that name. In 1885, The Squatter and the Don is published, which is a fictional account of land struggles in California after the United States annexation. The historical aspects illustrate demise of feudal Spanish rancho system and questions whether capitalism is better than life prior to annexation. In 1883, the Mexican law of colonization resulted in private owners attempting to purchase Ruiz's land. Ruiz faces considerable legal problems. In 1889, Ruiz now legally owns most of her land that others attempted to take from her. In 1890,
the Mexican-American War. An important historical event which molds the Burton's life is the Mexican-American War and its effects on California. The Burton, at the height of the war, was living in Baja California with her family, and after her town is seized, moves to Alta California, which is rumored to become a U.S. territory. So what exactly ignites Mexican-American War between 1846 and 1848? Here we see the inner workings of American imperialism, American capitalism, white supremacy, and Angelized Christianity as they merge together for the purposes of expansionism. Since the mid-1840s, the U.S. is conquering West for economic opportunity, and although gold won't be discovered until the end of the war, the doctrine known as manifest destiny would encourage and justify the conquest as a God-given right. So in 1845, James K. Polk is president, and he's a big fanatic of manifest destiny. He advocates for Texan annexation. it happens, but there's a big dispute over where Texan territory ends and Mexican land begins. Mexico says, your line is at the Nueces River. The Rio Grande, that's all us. The U.S. was not having it, and as soon as Mexican troops cross Rio Grande, all bets are off and war begins. By October 1845, there are over 3,000 Americans ready to take land by force. There was also a lot of Mexican infighting, which mirrored the chaotic political leadership of Mexico at the time. And the U.S. won despite having less numbers, and despite it being fought in Mexican territory. This Rio Nueces and Rio Grande dispute is the battle that kicks off the war, which officially begins in 1846. Rodolfo Acuña, in the third edition of Occupied America, A History of Chicanos, argues that the U.S. took advantage of a young, politically unstable Mexico. To put things into perspective, Mexico in 1846 had 4 different presidencies. There's still a lot of internal battle going on within the country, and the military itself is split into 2 different factions, the Permanentes and the Activos. The military is weak, and Mexico is fighting with old British muskets from the Napoleon Wars of 30 years ago, while the Americans had rifles and revolvers. It is clear that the prospects for Mexico winning are slim. But how does the Mexico-Texas conflict affect the Burton and California? Well, Polk had expressed interest in Santa Alta back in 1845 and offered to pay $5 million for the territories, but Mexico did not take the bait and considered it an insult. A lot of Californians, however, favored annexation either through British or American intervention, which would help explain why the Burton's family chooses to move from Baja California to Alta California, knowing it would become a U.S. territory. 3 months after the U.S. officially declares war, does the Congress agree for the inclusion of California? However, American settlers had already jumped the gun. In June, in an event called the Bear Flag Revolt, which has many varying accounts, it is said that a group of 30 or so settlers capture and arrest Mexican politician Mariano Guadalupe Vallejo, write a constitution, and declare California an independent republic. Of course, full American conquest is won through a series of battles from then on. The Bear Flaggers joined the U.S. Army in taking possession through many battles. In January 13, 1848, the informal Treaty of Cahuega ends the fighting of the Mexican-American War in Alta California. In February 2, 1848, Mexico formally cedes Alta California and other territories to the United States under the terms of the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
Who Would Have Thought is the first novel de Burton wrote. This is a huge deal because it was the first novel to be written in English by a Mexican living in the United States. It was published in 1872, however, it was ignored for over 100 years. This novel reflects American society as obsessive over class, race, and religion. The protagonist in the story, Lola, is a Mexican-American born Indian, which her family tried to conceal. This novel was brought out to the public in the late 20th century, which isn't that long ago. I found this incredible because I don't recall learning about de Burton in history class as a child. She definitely should have been a part of history, but the fact she isn't portrayed as she should be reinforces why she published this novel to begin with. Her novel is honest and touches base on very important issues that can technically still be seen today when it comes to the conversation of land, culture, and the United States. The Squatter and the Don was published in 1885 and is her most famous piece of literature. She anonymously published it under the name C. Loyal, which derives from Ciudadano Leal. She takes a jab at the American political system and shows the reader her Mexican identification. The book is written from the perspective of the conquered and touches on a lot of political issues such as the Land Act of 1851 and railroad monopoly. We are given the perspectives of these people and the injustices they face despite the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The story of the squatter and the don fictionally documents the many California families that lost their land due to the squatters in litigation. De Burton embodied resistance and articulated her critiques through this novel. This was her push for social reform.
In the book Conflicts of Interest, edited by Rosario Sanchez and Beatriz Pita, published in 2001, 100 years after her death, are about the letters María Ruiz de Burton sent to different friends and government officials. Folks she knew from her husband's relation and those she knew from her own family's political party, but the most telling were in correspondence with Mariano Guadalupe Vallejo, a fellow California and, well, an amigo. De Burton in this book and in the World Wide Web is referred to as Marb. Marb. But Marb was not a woman to be reckoned with. These letters expose her wit, sarcasm, and her sledgehammer personality when it came to women's rights, Mexican rights, especially those captivated, race identity, frustration with the Yankees and political system, and about her life in general. Now let's break that all down. Okay, so in these letters, she talked about class, racial, and ethnic identity. Marb was a barb, She had all the privileges of a wealthy Mexican family. She was educated in Spanish and French and later in English. Her letters are very telling of her education, as she wrote very formally but aggressively using the fine Marb confidence. However, she didn't really see herself as a Mexican. Let me be clear. I say that to separate what we would describe the difference between a Mexican and American ethnicity now and what it meant to her in her eyes and at her current state. Then this line wasn't as defined as it is now. Marb was mainly raised in Baja California, and then, with the assistance of Henry, she helped others move to Alta California to gain citizenship under the treaty, which is just California now. In this day, to the most of Mexico, this was considered a submission to the enemy, and Marb would have been looked at as a traitor to the mainland Mexicanos. In some of these letters, she describes herself as white, or rather American, to the Yankees, and does not understand why she is not granted the same privileges as her white friends and neighbors. Let's sit on that for a second. She is a proud Mexican that considered herself white, ? But in this day, she was practicing equality for what the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo promised. Pay up, U.S. You owe Marb some money and some land. We'll get how she handles that later. She also discusses regional descriptions in current law. Like most writers of the 19th century, like most American writers of the 19th century, she wrote about her travels and in realism and naturalism style of her life of the time. Marb was a very mindful activist of the current livelihood state. No less, no more. She was very present in the current movements and class differences. However, she kept her Marb Mexican roots by also writing in historical romance. The blend in her writings is parallel to her life as she continuously tried to find balance between being a Latin human, a Latin woman, with American privilege and lack of American privilege. That identity crisis is noted in her books and the letters. Marb was the U.S. Carmen Sandiego of the 19th century. She traveled to the East Coast, raised in West Coast, and died in Chicago, the lovely Midwest. The letters articulate her distaste for the Yankees and calls them hypocrites, while she devotes her love to the Californios. But then she finds them to be whack too. Women's rights and gender frustration. I say she can't found the Californians to be whack as well because Marb was well educated in schooling studies, but where she differs from the most of the peers is in her education of the law. She is knowledgeable on current laws, the treaty, stocks, the market, land ownership, and because of this knowledge, she laments the fact that she's a woman and a woman of color. As she struggled to be so close to the American dream in Mexican land but falls short due to legalities and financial struggles after her dear hubby died. Remember, she grew up with a silver spoon and married into a silverware collection. But after he died, she was financially pressed and had to be savvy to make money and claim her land. She tried growing some crops, but then decided to write. Her mission was to expose the corrupt government she once praised. "I'll publish your cowardice all over California," she wrote, in The Swatter and the Dawn in the Age of Howells. There was also other Mexican writers that wanted to write biographies and continue in her writing, but also struggled with the idea that they knew for a fact that their ancestors would have been rejected by the family of Marb.
Malinal, later named La Malinche, was born somewhere between 1496 and 1501 and played a key role in the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire in 1521. La Malinche was given as a slave to Hernán Cortés and became his interpreter and advisor, translating from Nahuatl language to Xuntal Mayan language to Spanish. She was perceived and portrayed as an evil temptress and traitor to her race, a disloyal compatriot for entering a romantic relationship with the white Cortés. Despite the fact that she was betrayed by her very own culture and given to Cortés as a slave. Similar to the myth of La Malinche, although de Burton chooses to leave her country and move to California with Captain Henry Burton, one wonders if it was much of a choice. At this time, Baja is occupied by the U.S. during the Mexican-American War, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo of 1848 was settled when de Burton was only 16 years old. Like La Malinche, de Burton marries an Anglo man who led the invasion of her very own country. De Burton's life is timelined by wars, 4 of them, so it is not surprising that, like La Malinche, she finds a lover in a conquistador. The myth of La Malinche affected and still affects the Chicana identity and female sexuality, which has been distorted by colonialism. According to Mary Louise Pratt, the 3 ways that Chicanas defy men in a predominantly androcentric culture reflect the lives of de Burton and La Malinche. The 3 ways are 1. Marry an Anglo man or take Anglo lovers. 2. Leave the community to seek higher education. And 3. Ally yourself with feminism. This traitor identity, which has proliferated the gender-specific fear in men, has led to the constant betrayal and conquest of Chicana women. However, language used in translation and writing can blur these boundaries and enable a rebirth of identity, changing the myth of La Malinche from traitor to translator and move beyond the binary voice of colonizer and colonized. This is what Ruiz de Burton's first 2 novels attempt to dismantle, these boundaries between being American and Mexican. As the first Mexican-American author to write in English, de Burton attempts to act as translator by revealing the struggles of life in an alien culture displaced from Mexican culture and Catholicism and her aristocratic lineage. For example, her 2 novels take on the theme of family romances. In Mexican culture, familia conveys immediate family, friends, neighbors, business associates, and sometimes, often, the nation, Mexico. This explains why her novels end in cross-ethnic marriages. The marriage draws attention to the irony of the rhetoric of democracy and the corruption of the American government, but it also symbolizes and alludes to the promise of 2 identities crossing boundaries and becoming one familia, Mexican and American. Through this attempt, de Burton paves the way for Chicana writers to dispel the myth of women as disloyal traitors, and she models how to use language to re-identify and recover rights for Californios, or any group of peoples, by exposing the tragic truths that she discovered within American democracy and the open discrimination of people of Mexican descent through employment, housing, purchase of property, and legal representation. Finally, de Burton acts as translator, as her novels seem to directly reflect her life experiences dealing with New England society, illegal dispossession of Californios of their land, and the trials and tribulations of creating a combined space for female Mexican and American identities. Overall, the themes of de Burton's novels and letters reflect her real-life experiences. The themes can be separated into 2 categories: historical cross-cultural romances and the U.S. legal and political system. Like many authors, de Burton writes about what she knows, which includes cross-ethnic marriages and the trials and tribulations of being an alien in a new country, and creating one identity from 2 separate identities. This reflects her own marriage and religious dispensation from Catholicism and Protestantism, her young aristocratic life and her later life of little means, and her feelings towards life as an alien to both home country and her new U.S. home. De Burton did not begin writing until later in life after she traveled across the United States with her husband. It was after these occurrences and opportunities did de Burton begin to voice her opinion about the hypocrisy of the U.S. legal and political system. In her second novel, and in many of her letters, de Burton discusses the irony of the U.S. fight for freedom and democracy, while simultaneously stripping the dispossessed Californios of land rights, claims, and cultural respect. These two themes intersect after Henry Burton passes away, and de Burton attempts to reclaim the land of her family, acting as her own legal counsel. Her fight against racism and her fight for her legal voice as a woman was an uphill battle and cost her nearly everything she had rights to in the end. However, these personal battles allowed de Burton to find her voice as a Chicana author. Her quest for the meaning of being a Mexican woman versus the meaning of being an American woman ultimately affected her identity and her written work, which exemplifies her determination to create space for the Californios and future female authors. Ah, si yo fuera hombre, que miserable cosa es una mujer. Ah, if I were a man, what a sorry thing a woman is.